The Keening Hills, the Plateau of Leng, 4718. The party stepped through Haojin's gate spell, and it was clear that they weren't in Axis any longer. The very air itself seemed to change around them. Cold tendrils slivered through their chests and spines, not merely physical cold, but something deeper, as though it sought to grasp at their very souls. "Welcome to the Plateau of Leng," Haojin announced, her tone calm but laced with an unspoken warning. One of the many horrible places hidden in the dark corners of the great beyond. The world that greeted them was a waking nightmare. Overhead, the sky churned in oppressive chaos, a swirl of ashen greys, bruised purples, and a faint, sickly green glow that pulsed with a rhythm only the mad might find comforting. There was no sun, no stars, just an endless sunless expanse of shifting colors that seemed to press down on them with each passing second. The ground, which appeared cracked beneath their boots, was an expanse of blackened rock and sand webbed with fissures that exhaled sulfuric heat. The smell was acrid, clawing at their throats with each breath. Marius knelt briefly, running his gauntleted hand over the ground. "It feels alive, somehow." His voice was tight, strained. In the distance, jagged mountains clawed at the tortured sky like broken teeth, their peaks shrouded in fog that flickered with unnatural lights. Aurelius's eyes lingered on the flickers, his brows knitted together. Zan, their scythe-wielding Vanth psychopomp, shifted uneasily, and it looked as though even his usual composure was being tested by the faint hum that seemed to emanate from the land itself. It was discordant, maddening, vibrating in some irregular rhythm that defied understanding. He seemed to be whispering something to himself, perhaps some prayer to Pharasma. What are you saying over there?" asked Diyanah. "I was just whispering an old rhyming couplet to myself," said Zan, "to remind myself why we Pharasmans so hate everything touched by the dark tapestry. It goes, 'That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die.'" "I don't understand that at all," noted the monk. "I don't imagine that you would," said Zan simply. "The death of death might not frighten you, but it certainly frightens me, and few things do." Diyanah just gave Zan an awkward nod. Strange shapes seemed to move at the edges of their vision here, teasing the corners of their perception. When they turned their heads to look directly at them, the shapes vanished, leaving only the gnawing sensation that they were not alone. Aurelius looked at the gate Haojin had summoned, and he could see she was ready to dismiss it. "Better to hide it," he said, "in case we need to make a quick getaway. We can close it later." Aurelius created an enduring illusion of the rocks of Leng covering the gate. Haojin looked it over and was clearly impressed. "You are a master of illusion," she said to him. Aurelius blushed slightly. Haojin stepped ahead of the rest of them, her famous ruby hair catching the faint green glow of the oppressive sky. "You may feel disoriented here," she said matter-of-factly, her voice cutting through the surreal haze. "The Plateau of Leng does not adhere to the natural order of things. Your thoughts may slip, your time may fragment, but hold fast to each other and our purpose. It's the best anchor to reality we have out here." Demi shivered, pulling her tricorn hat low over her eyes, as though to shield herself from the oppressive landscape. "Androids can't go crazy, right, Dyson?" she said to Haojin's giant metal companion. The Inevitable shrugged. "I think with time, anything that stays out here for too long isn't safe." "He's right. The Plateau of Leng is madness given form," Haojin noted. She had cast an overland flight spell on herself, so she flew across the landscape rather than walked, her robes flowing behind her like liquid flame. "Keep close. Leng is not a place to wander in. The plateau may take liberties with travelers who stray too far from the group." Watching Haojin move across the sky, Aurelius cast his own overland flight spell and flew up to meet her as well. Rodrigo, his raven familiar, which had been perched tensely on his shoulder, took off with him as he took flight. "Feels like we're being watched," he murmured to Haojin. "Watched," Haojin remarked, her eyes scanning their surroundings. "Try hunted. We are outsiders to this place, and Leng does not like intruders. Expect company." They had Klokosik's instructions to guide them. The most notable landmark to guide their way, she said, would be a single stalagmite, a tower of rough green stone built like a dragon's tooth that reached for the sky. Near its base they would find the Maw of Despair, a deep, jagged chasm that should seem to plunge into the very heart of Leng. At the end of the maw, they should expect to find the Whispering Hollow, a dark and twisting cavern leading ever deeper into the darkness until at the end of the hollow they would find a large clearing overlooking an endless pit. Beyond the pit, if they could light their way, they would find a veritable sea of strange islands floating in the darkness. These were the floating islands of Ulam Slau, and upon one of these islands Klakosik suggested she would find a steaming lake, which she referred to as the Pool of Thoughtless Tranquility. That place, she said, was the domain of the Placid One, and where Klakosik saw him holding the captured Prince Carius. Haojin led the way, and they fell into step behind her, their breaths shallow as they navigated the fissures in the uneasy terrain. The air itself seemed to vibrate, the dissonant hum growing louder with each step. It was not long before they reached the so-called Maw of Despair. In the maw, it felt like reality was warping around them. As they looked up the sides of the ravine, they seemed to close in around them like a stone bower, but when they looked directly up, they could only make out the endless twisting void of Leng's bruised and sickly sky. "Try not to look at the terrain too much," suggested Haojin. "Keep your eyes focused ahead." Then a deep, resonant war horn suddenly tore through the oppressive stillness of the maw, its vibration a visceral force that coiled through their spines like a living serpent. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical thing, an unnatural resonance that seemed to ripple through the stone around them, making the walls tremble and the ground beneath their feet hum in low, discordant rhythm. Aurelius froze midair. "That's not good," he muttered, his voice tight. Before anyone could respond, the keening wail of alien hounds echoed through the cavern. It was a sound somewhere between a wolf's howl and the screech of tearing metal, layered with a maddening, chittering undertone. "Hounds of Tyndalos," Haojin said. "Beware their many-angled attacks." Diyanah took his well-practiced dragon-style combat stance. "Hey guys, I'm starting to see why this place doesn't get a lot of tourists." The sound of clawed feet scraping against stone soon reached them, a rapid, skittering rhythm that seemed to echo from every direction at once. It was impossible to tell how many of the hounds there were, or where exactly they were coming from, but the oppressive air of the hollow carried their approach like a drumbeat of doom. Then suddenly they saw the hounds, and it was as Haojin had stated. They had a strange kind of teleportation ability, the many-angled leap, which permitted them to claw their way out of the surrounding sides of the cavern, anywhere there was an odd angle, and there was plenty of odd angles to choose from. Soon the cavern was filled with hounds, and beyond them the huntmasters had started to appear, clad in black armor, accented in sickly purples, and wielding bows illuminated with a violent yellow light. The huntmasters began to rain down arrows on the heroes. Then the huntmasters parted slightly, and a final menacing sight came into view. 3 Lamia sorceresses, cat-like centaurs with the bodies of human women from the torso up, but the bodies of hunting cats from the waist down. They raced towards the party, magical arcs of lightning illuminating their way as they went. The clash was immediate, ferocious, and chaotic. The hounds lunged from the shadows, their distorted forms twisting unnaturally as they moved, each one exuding an aura of madness, their glowing eyes locked on to the party, and their jagged maws snapping with an otherworldly hunger. Demi was the first to react, as she often was. She had taken a page out of Aurelius's book, and she had learned to cast the haste spell as well. First she magically boosted the party with the haste spell, and then she began to sing, her song magic further bolstering the party's already significant combat strength. She took aim with her crossbow, not at the dozens of hounds that seemed to be pouring out of the walls. On that front she was counting on the party's warriors to keep her relatively safe from these beasts, but rather at the Lamia priestesses beyond them, whose magical arsenal she was the most worried about. Of the group's warriors, Dyson stepped forward first, the mechanical giant moving with precision and purpose. His emerald eyes flickered, and his heavy bastard sword came down in a sweeping arc that cleaved through the air like a falling star. The blade connected with one of the hounds mid-leap, and the force of the blow split the creature in twain. Another hound darted in from Dyson's left, faster than any mortal beast had a right to be. But Dyson's reaction was faster still, his free hand lashing out, metal fingers catching the creature by its throat mid-air. The hound thrashed, claws scraping against his armored chassis, but Dyson crushed its windpipe with mechanical ease before hurling the corpse into another onrushing beast. To Dyson's right, Diyanah exploded into motion, his dragon-style strikes a blur of disciplined fury. A hound snapped at his feet, but Diyanah leapt high in the air, twisting mid-flight, to bring his heel down in a devastating axe kick. His flaming foot connected with the hound's skull, causing a sharp crack to echo through the canyon as the creature crumpled to the ground. Another lunged at his back, but Diyanah pivoted, his ignited fist flying in a barrage of perfectly aimed strikes, each punch landing with bone-crushing force, driving the hound back step by step until it stumbled into the path of Dyson's sword. The automaton's blade swung again, ending the creature with a clean, brutal stroke. Then, not far behind Diyanah, emerged Raja, a golden blur of raw muscle and ferocity. With a thunderous roar, the massive beast leapt into the fray, his claws extending and fangs bared. His golden mane shimmered in the sickly light of Leng, a proud and noble beast, and a stark contrast to the twisted forms of the alien hounds. Raja's first target was a hound creeping low, trying to flank Diyanah. The lion's sheer weight slammed into the creature, pinning it to the ground. His powerful jaws clamped down on the hound's throat, ending its struggle in an instant. Raja tossed the lifeless form aside and whirled to face the next threat. "Good boy," Diyanah called over his shoulder, even as he drove an elbow into a hound's face, snapping its jaw shut. He pivoted just in time to see Raja leap again, this time swiping a hound mid-air as it lunged. The lion's claws raked across the creature's hide, leaving deep, dark gouges that oozed shadowy ichor. Marius had taken a moment to wade into the fray, waiting to see which of the hounds might go for Demi, and who was in the center of them, but potentially still exposed. Up in the air with their flight spells, Haojin and Aurelius were relatively well protected from the melee. Then a hound lunged for the bard, but Marius interceded, his round shield thrusting upwards, catching the creature's snout and driving it back. Without missing a beat, he twisted his body and drove his punch dagger into the beast's exposed flank. The hound let out a garbled howl as it collapsed, dark ichor spilling into the fractured ground. Another came at him from the side, but Marius used his shield like a battering ram, slamming the edge into the hound's jaw. It staggered, dazed, and he followed up with a savage uppercut from the punch dagger, driving the blade up beneath its chin. The beast shuddered, then went limp, crumpling at his feet. "We gotta keep them at bay," Diyanah shouted, sidestepping another attack as his fists cracked against another hound's ribs. "Don't let them surround us." The group fought as a seamless unit, Dyson's heavy strikes anchoring the defense, while Diyanah and Marius moved with fluid precision, striking down the relentless tide of attackers. For every hound they felled, it seemed two more emerged from the shadows, their keening cries blending with the maddening hum of the maw. Overhead, Aurelius, Haojin, and Zan were flying, whizzing over the battlefield, preparing to engage the archers and the priestesses. Haojin sent a cascade of incandescent flames down onto the Lamia priestesses. One raised up a crackling magical claw to counter a spell, another one summoning a telekinetic fist out to drag Haojin onto the battlefield, where they might tear her apart more easily. Haojin dodged the magical fist even as she overpowered the other creature's counterspell. Zan then came crashing down on the third priestess, his mighty scythe slashing at the dexterous feline. Meanwhile, Aurelius had taken Haojin's advice to heart in their conversation a few days ago. He would lean into his strength as a master of illusions, and the spell he cast was Horrific Doubles, a spell he had been planning to use for some time. Horrific Doubles was like a more potent version of the Mirror Image spell, except instead of simply creating doubles to protect Aurelius from the archer's attacks, it also created the illusion that Aurelius himself was a monstrous creature, and each of the doubles was similarly monstrous as well. As he bravely flew towards the archers, a wave of magical fear radiated off of Aurelius. They all took aim at him, but the fear he emanated threw off their attacks, and those few archers which managed to land a shot on target were simply causing his horrific doubles to wink out. The real Aurelius was impossible to pick out against the swarm of flying monsters they saw overhead. When he was closer, Aurelius blasted the archers with a shadow evocation casting of Fireball. A shadowy ball of flame descended on the archers, who could not disbelieve his powerful and resilient illusions. The archers leapt for cover as the shadowy flames exploded around them. Meanwhile, down below, Zan had sliced his way through one of the Lamias. Another one had been incinerated by Haojin's mastery of fire magic. The third had taken great loping strides towards Demi, hoping to get some protection against Haojin's superior magic by joining the hounds in the fore. As she raced, she sent a powerful arc of lightning out towards Demi and the melee fighters. With practiced expertise, Demi leapt aside. Raja took the worst of the blast, and Diyanah immediately stepped onto his feet. "You guys have this, right?" he said to the others. Marius, who was struggling against two hounds snapping at his legs, grinned despite the chaos. "You know it." Diyanah focused his chi, using the abundant step ability he had watched the dwarven monks use at the Tallgrass's caravanserai. Suddenly he dropped on top of the last Lamia priestess, landing on the back of her and immediately putting the feline centaur in a powerful headlock. Witnessing all this, Haojin turned her attention to Aurelius, and she was clearly impressed by the fact that the young wizard had somehow managed to hold his own against over a dozen skilled archers. "You're doing well," she noted. Aurelius flew back towards her and caught her off guard by giving her a flying high five. "Horrific Doubles is keeping them at bay," he said breathlessly, "but not really dispersing them." "Well, let me help with that," she said confidently. Hao-Jin cast a conjuration spell, and suddenly a herd of triceratops emerged in the canyon, charging towards the archers. Moreover, thanks to the bloodline of the phoenix that coursed through her veins, these weren't merely large horned dinosaurs. They were flaming beasts, igniting the ground as they stampeded. Those poor archers that weren't crushed underfoot or ignited with phoenix fire were soon cut down by Zan, who flew in, his magical scythe cutting down any that lingered in his path. In the rearguard, the group had started to surge forward against the onslaught of the hounds. Dyson's sword was an unyielding wall of steel, Marius' shield and dagger a study in brutal efficiency, and all the while Raja's savage strength tore through the ranks of the alien creatures. Finally, in the center of the conflict, Diyanah snapped the neck of the last Lamia he had been wrestling with. It was over. Hao-Jin, Zan, and Aurelius flew back to the party. "Leng's defenders will think twice about disturbing us again," observed Hao-Jin, "and we acquitted ourselves admirably here. But we're still going to have to face the Placid One and his allies, so don't get too comfortable." Demi checked over the party with a curing wand, and after a moment taken to make sure everyone was okay, they continued. Finally, after a trek that felt like hours, even though it had likely been far less time than this, the ground began to level out. The twisting, claustrophobic descent gave way to a yawning cave mouth, and beyond it a sprawling cavern, its darkness pierced only by faint, unsettling glimmers of light reflecting off the jagged rock walls. "This must be the Whispering Hollow," Hao-Jin said, her voice low. "From here it only gets darker. Keep your focus sharp, as this place will keep testing us." "Oh, wonderful," said Diyanah, "because it's just been a cakewalk up to now." Hao-Jin conjured a small sphere of fire to light the way for them, and they advanced, following the light and stepping into the hollow. The name of the place began to make sense as they entered. Here, faint, maddening whispers brushed against their ears, half-formed words, fragments of sentences that sounded tantalizingly familiar but made no sense. Occasionally, the whispers were accompanied by the sounds of feet or claws scraping against the tunnel walls. The group stuck close together, fearing another attack in the tunnels, but none seemed to come. At long last, the winding path of the Maw of Despair widened into a clearing. The cavern had opened up to reveal an immense rocky shelf, its jagged edge extending over a vast yawning abyss. The pit stretched endlessly below, a void that seemed to pull all of their gazes, whispering promises of oblivion. The oppressive hum of Leng's dissonant rhythm had grown louder here as well, now vibrating in their bones. Hao-Jin stepped forward, her crimson hair reflecting the firelight she had summoned to guide their way. With a measured wave of her hand, the light floated over the edge of the precipice. It drifted across the void, illuminating the strange sights beyond. Before them, suspended in defiance of gravity, hung the floating islands of Ulam Slau. Great chunks of rock hovered in the void like frozen debris from some ancient cataclysm. Each island was unique, some jagged and raw, others smoothed by time and strange forces that governed this alien dimension. The space between the islands was an expanse of nothingness, a dizzying emptiness that seemed to devour sound and sense alike. From their vantage point, they could see narrow stone bridges and precarious natural paths connecting some of the islands. Others floated in complete isolation, their surfaces dotted with bizarre vegetation, spindly trees with luminous pulsating fruit, and creeping vines that seemed to move of their own accord. "Well, the good news is that Klakosik wasn't lying about what we'd find here," said Aurelius. "The bad news is now Hao-Jin and I are going to have to blow a bunch of spells just to grant everyone flight so we can cross the chasm here." Diyanah stepped closer to the edge, Raja by his side, the lion's golden mane bristling as they peered down into the abyss. Guys," he said awkwardly. Hao-Jin's floating orb of light dipped closer to the precipice, and its golden glow illuminated a grotesque sight. Twisted, decaying hands clawed their way up the rocky lip. Ghouls, dozens of them, emaciated figures with taut, pale flesh stretched over gnashing jaws. They began to pour over the edge of the abyss like a tidal wave of death, their glowing eyes burning with unnatural hunger. "They're climbing up," Diyanah shouted, stepping back and readying his fists. Raja snarled, his claws raking the stones as he prepared to pounce. Aurelius' voice rose above the din as he frantically began weaving a spell. "We've got more company than the ghouls." A deep, terrible roar rumbled from the darkness of two side tunnels. From the left emerged a towering gug, its grotesque four-armed frame swaying unnaturally, the sideways maw that split its face growling as it moved. From the right, another gug lurched forward, its razor-sharp claws gleaming as it smashed against the walls, dislodging chunks of stone. "We're surrounded again," shouted Demi, notching a bolt in her crossbow. Dyson stepped forward, his massive bastard sword held steady. The dim light of Hao-Jin's orb reflected off his metallic frame as he spoke in his cold, mechanical tone. Ghouls, high threat. Gugs, greater threat. Preparing to engage primary hostiles. The clearing erupted into chaos. Marius let out a battle cry, approaching the ravine's lip, into the center of the ghoulish mass, his round shield smashing into the twisted faces of the ghouls. Coriana's blade found its mark again and again, striking with practiced ferocity. Another ghoul lunged for his throat, but he slammed his shield into it, sending it careening into the abyss. Although Aurelius could fly, the ceiling in the clearing was not as high as he would have liked. He was attempting to cast another mirror image spell when the claws of a leaping ghoul wrapped around his ankle and yanked him out of the sky, sending him tumbling into the tunnel floor. "Keep them off me!" Aurelius shouted as he tried to cast defensively, his hands moving in precise patterns. Haojin raised her arms, a crimson halo of energy coalescing around her. With a sweeping gesture, she hurled a wave of crackling fire into the mass of ghouls. The flames engulfed several of the creatures, their wails echoing across the chamber as they burned to ash. Dyson had gone for one of the large gugs. Surging forward with machine-like precision, he and the gug barreled towards each other. The great beast's claws descended on the inevitable. Formidable Dyson looked like he might actually be overpowered by the gug, but then suddenly Zan was behind the creature. With a swift swing of his magical scythe, he severed one of the gug's arms off, and it howled in agony. "Raja!" Diyanah called, darting to meet the second gug. The lion roared and sprang at the towering monstrosity, claws tearing into its thick hide. The gug swiped with one of its 4 massive arms, narrowly missing the agile predator. Diyanah ducked under a flailing limb, his fist striking in a blur of rapid blows, his dragon-style technique igniting its grotesque shaggy fur. It retaliated with a sweep of its claw that forced him to backflip just out of range. Demi raised her crossbow, her sharp eyes scanning the chaos for an opening. She took aim at the second gug, loosing a bolt that embedded itself in the creature's shoulder. It gurgled in pain, but before it could charge, Aurelius greased the floor beneath it. The massive creature fell on its back, and then Raja leapt onto the gug's chest, his claws raking across its chest and neck. The party had fought as one, each member throwing their all at the swarm. The ghouls dwindled under their relentless assault, and the hulking forms of the gugs were cut down by the superior skill and tactics of the heroes. As the last gug fell to the stone floor with a bone-shaking thud, the echoes of battle faded, replaced only by the omnipresent hum of Leng. The party stood amidst the carnage, bloodied and breathless, their eyes turning once more to the islands of Ulam Slau in the abyss before them. The silence that followed the battle was fleeting. Just as the party's breath began to steady, the air was pierced by an unnatural screech, a shrill, bone-rattling cry that sent chills rippling through their weary bodies. Diyanah spun towards the abyss, his fists still clenched. Raja's growl rumbled low and guttural as his golden eyes locked on the swirling darkness across the way. From the islands of Ulam Slau, shadows had stirred. The shapes of monstrous winged creatures emerged from the gloom, their elongated reptilian forms flapping towards the rocky shelf with an eerie grace. Shantak birds, grotesque predators of the void, rose in a macabre flock, their leathery wings slicing through the air with thunderous beats. And they were not alone. "Riders," Demi said, her voice barely above a whisper. She pointed to the figures perched on the backs of the Shantaks, clad in robes of pale yellow. Their garments seemed to writhe and flow as if alive, ribbons trailing over their loose robes. The riders carried wicked-looking weapons, curved and barbed. "The denizens of Leng at last," Haojin hissed, her sharp eyes narrowing as she stepped closer to the group. Her silken robes billowing slightly in the chill, sulphur-laden wind, and she raised her arms as though to shield the others from the sight before them. "They heard our fight." Aurelius's breath hitched as his gaze locked on a particular figure among the descending swarm. He raised a hand and pointed. "And that one, that's him, the placid one, the one that stole Marius." The largest of the Shantaks cut a terrifying figure, its ridged wings slicing through the fetid air with ease, its glistening obsidian-black scales gleaming faintly in Haojin's light, and its talons curved wickedly, eager to rend flesh. Perched atop the beast was the placid one himself. His flowing yellow robes fluttered like tattered banners as he raised his crystalline glaive high, its malevolent glow a beacon of dread. He pointed his weapon at the group in a wordless declaration of war. The immense Shantak let out a deafening screech, its sound reverberating through the void. Behind it, the other denizens followed suit, their mounts diving towards the shelf with unnerving precision. "Well, they've done us the favor of revealing which island is his," Diyanah said, his voice calm but charged with determination. "So let's not wait for them to come to us." His hand shot towards Aurelius. "Aurelius, when I say go, you haste us." Aurelius nodded sharply as he began channeling his magic. Diyanah reached to his hip, pulling free the coiled rope he always carried. With a firm grip, he uttered his command word, and the rope unfurled, stiffening into the standard of conquest. "When the standard hits the ground," Diyanah explained quickly, "we'll all be able to fly for exactly 10 minutes. We're meeting them in the air. Aurelius's haste will give us the speed to close the distance. If this fight isn't over before the spell expires," he said warningly, casting a pointed look at everyone in the group, "make sure you're above solid ground, preferably that island that the Placid One came from." The group nodded in unison, their faces set in grim resolve. Demi checked her crossbow, loading a bolt with practiced speed. Dyson hoisted his massive sword, his metal joints clicking faintly. Raja growled softly. "Are you ready, Aurelius?" Diyanah asked. "Ready," he said firmly. Diyanah thrust the standard into the ground and its magic spread. The group felt the exhilarating surge of flight take hold. "Now!" Aurelius unleashed his spell. A wave of magical energy washed over the party, enhancing their speed and reflexes. Without hesitation they launched themselves into the void, their forms streaking through the sickly air like arrows. The swarm of Shantaks closed in fast, but so did the heroes, their paths converging in mid-air with a thunderous clash. Dyson's great sword cleaved through the wing of a Shantak, sending it spiraling into the abyss, while Raja leapt from the air with a feral roar, bringing a denizen down with its powerful claws. Zan was the most natural flyer among them, wheeling around the Shantaks, slicing viciously with his razor-sharp scythe, and decapitating the dreadful birds wherever he flew by. He seemed to watch with strange delight as the riders plummeted to their deaths below. Hao-Jin hurled a torrent of flame towards a cluster of riders, scattering them as the fiery explosion rocked the sky. Demi's crossbow bolts flew true, striking another rider in the shoulder and sending him tumbling off his mount. Diyanah soared ahead, his fists glowing with chi energy as he weaved through the chaos, his focus locked on the Placid One. "I'm coming for you," he growled, his voice cutting through the cacophony of battle. The fight had begun in earnest, a collision of wills and strength suspended in the endless void of Leng. The void around them was soon alive with the sound of clashing weapons, monstrous screeches, and the guttural cries of the Shantak birds. The great winged beasts twisted and turned in the air, their wing beats creating gales that buffeted the combatants. The heroes fought like a storm given form. Dyson was a whirlwind of metal, his massive bastard sword a blur as it cleaved through the leathery wings of a Shantak. Aurelius conjured bolts of shadow, each one streaking through the air and striking down riders with unerring accuracy. "Focus on thinning their numbers," he called out, his voice strained but steady. Hao-Jin, her robes fluttering behind her, hurled orbs of molten fire into the fray, her spells exploding with devastating force among their foes. Marius roared as he leapt onto a Shantak mid-flight, driving his punch dagger deep into the creature's flank, while using his shield to fend off its snapping jaws. With a final twist, he forced the beast into a nosedive, rolling free just before it crashed into a jagged island below. Demi hung back behind the group, her resonant voice starting to drown out the enduring thrum of Leng and empowering her allies, and her crossbow a blur as she fired bolt after bolt. In the middle of this chaos, Diyanah was a streak of golden determination. The flight of the standard and the magic of the haste spell allowed him to move with impossible grace, dodging Shantak claws and weaving past enemy glaives. His target was clear, the Placid One, who hovered at the edge of the fray, commanding his forces with a chilling calm. With this burst of speed, Diyanah closed the distance, colliding with the Placid One and smashing him off the back of his Shantak bird, until together they both landed on the Placid One's island. The Shantak rider climbed to his feet, his crystalline glaive glowing ominously as he turned to face the monk. "So you've come all this way for the little prince," the Placid One said in his familiar lilting tone. "You will regret this." "No, I came all this way to kick your ass," said Diyanah. "I felt your voice in my head, and you made me do things I didn't want to do. I'm done with letting other people inside my head. You will regret having done that." The Placid One gave a strange laugh. "Seems like that was on you. Perhaps you should be more careful accepting gifts from strangers." Then the Placid One lurched forward, swinging its crystal scythe. Diyanah had nothing left to say, his fists glowing with chi energy as he dropped into a combat stance. The two clashed with explosive intensity, the Placid One's glaive slashing in wide, deadly arcs, while Diyanah countered with precise strikes aimed at his opponent's joints and unguarded areas. The fight led them to the edge of the pool of thoughtless tranquility, a steaming lake that seemed to ripple with the strange energy of Leng. Diyanah's strikes became faster, more focused, driving the Placid One back towards the water's edge. Finally, with a burst of chi, Diyanah surged forward, delivering a devastating punch to the denizen's chest. The Placid One staggered, his glaive clattering to the ground as he fell to his knees. Blood dripped from his mouth as he looked up at Diyanah, his eyes glowing faintly with otherworldly light. "You fool," he rasped, a wicked smile spreading across his cracked lips. By killing me, you'll make a terrible mistake." Diyanah's fists lowered slightly, his breathing heavy. "Somehow I doubt that," said the monk. The Placid One coughed a wet, choking sound. "It was my life, and my life alone, that kept this place hidden, protected from scrying spells, from prying eyes." He chuckled weakly. "Now that I'm gone, others will find this island. You have enemies more powerful than I that seek the prince. You've doomed him, and yourself." With that, the Placid One collapsed, his body dissolving into the strange glowing mist that rose from the alien pool. Diyanah stood still for a moment, the weight of the Placid One's words settling over him like a shroud. Behind him, the rest of the group landed on the island, their expressions a mix of relief and concern. "What did he say?" Hao-Jin asked. Diyanah turned to them, his face uncharacteristically grim. "I think we have to hurry. Aurelius needs to cast scrying now. We need to grab the prince and get him out of here." Aurelius landed beside his friend and began to cast his spell. "Over there," he said, and he indicated a cave entrance leading into a rocky cliff face not far from the steaming lake. Then crackling energy filled the air around them. This time Hao-Jin identified the spell before Aurelius could even begin to spellcraft it. "It is a gate spell," she said, "the same spell I cast to bring us here." As the gate began to form, they could see a land beyond it, a land of black-stepped pyramids surrounded by dark rocks and lakes of liquid green fire. They were looking into Xibalba, the nightmare realm of the Sakils. Then a human figure walked through the gate. Lean, dark, and brooding, he walked deliberately, so that his black, raven-tipped cane struck the ground loudly with each footfall. Slithering from the portal behind him were a number of Ichko Sakils, the same horrific cockroach-like creatures that they had fought at the Sanguine Brothers' slaughterhouse. "Thank you for killing that pesky Leng creature for me," said the man to them. "I don't know why Vadragan insisted on dealing with such unreliable beings. My allies are much more powerful and much more trustworthy." "That," said Demi emphatically to Dyson, who was towering beside her, "is Panavar Lothid. As the people of our homeworld like to say, the shit is about to get real." Dyson lifted his heavy blade, Diyanah ignited his fists, and Marius wiped some of the Leng blood off the blade of his gauntlet. "Really?" laughed Panavar. "You still think you can fight me?" And Panavar cast a time-stop spell. But it didn't work. Hao-Jin was ready for this, and she denied it with a counterspell. Panavar noticed her and the psychopomp suddenly and said defiantly, "Is that the famous Ruby Phoenix of Goka? Impressive. I see you've brought some powerful new friends to fight me. I have some friends too, though, and they're not as modest as yours." Another crackle of lightning filled the air as yet another gate began to open. A terrible, howling, screeching, trifold shriek echoed through the Placid One's island. A monstrous creature staggered out of the portal, 3 great bird heads shrieking into the sky. "It is Thasratum, the Mewling Storm," cried Zan, "my great enemy, on the threshold of becoming a dark demigod. All my work has led me to this final confrontation." Without a further thought, the psychopomp flew towards the immortal enemy. As he approached, the near demigod struck Zan with such force that Zan was sent hurtling into the dusty rocks. "This foe is beyond any of us," said Hao-Jin to the company, and for the first time since they arrived, Aurelius could see that there was genuine terror in her voice. Diyanah leapt onto Raja's back, not sure which way he should go. He just looked at Demi. "The shit is fully real now, it's fully real," he said, embracing her new turn of phrase. End of chapter. Hi there, I'm the Mythkeeper. You've just watched episode 5 of season 4 of my Pathfinder 616 War for the Crown series. In this episode, the party plunges into Leng. Now, at the end of the last episode, the party had to make a choice. They had to decide whether they were going to go to Xibalba, Leng, or Duskfathom. I kind of knew which way they were going to lean. Now, obviously, the adventure as written presumes that the heroes are going to go into the Lost Silhouette, which is part of Norgorber's. It's Norgorber's Herald's domain in Duskfathom, and I knew we probably weren't going to go there because the priority for the party was rescuing Prince Carius. It wasn't actually rescuing Taldaris. I had some ideas about how I wanted to bring that all together, but what that meant sort of significantly for me as a GM is I basically, once I knew we were going to go to Leng and not any of those other locations, I needed to build kind of a custom dungeon. So The way that I approach doing that kind of thing is I start with the monsters. I knew that I wanted Hounds of Tindalos. I wanted to get a little Lovecraftian here. I wanted to get some Gugs. I wanted to get some Leng ghouls. Lamias are also popular in the Plateau of Leng, and the Hunt Masters were kind of creatures of my own design. And of course, obviously, the denizens of Leng and the Shantak birds all come together kind of in this episode. The way that I approach building a dungeon, when you run a dungeon off of a book, it's fine for there to be unexplored rooms, unfound treasure. I think all of that makes a lot of sense, and it's kind of cool that there's stuff that exists that the players don't interact with. But if I'm going to take the time to prep something as a GM, I want to make sure that everything I spend time building actually gets used. And so for that reason, the dungeon is essentially super linear. It's not so much a dungeon as it is a journey, right? So they start in the Keening Hills, they go into the Maw of Despair, they have an encounter there. There was also kind of a madness mechanic, which if you listen to the story, there's this thrumming drum beat. The player characters are making will saves kind of constantly. There's a place called the Whispering Hollow, which follows the Maw of Despair. There's another encounter there, and then there's a big fight with the Shantak birds and the denizens of Leng at the floating islands. And so instead of building like a whole dungeon with a complicated map where players can go left or right, it's 3 kind of scripted encounters in sequence, which ended up working really well because each of the encounters were built very differently and the environments were very different. And a fantastical realm like Leng really gives you the ability to be like, okay, this is this crazy ravine, there's these sides you can fall off. The floating islands obviously is a completely fantastical environment. And so that kind of stuff was fun to put together and created some really dynamic fights. The other thing is that the environments are so fantastical that, and also they had so many allies in this, and they were fighting so many enemies that I realized in the course of cutting this that I wasn't going to be able to do the battle maps like I do for most of my dungeon crawls. Also, I didn't have real battle maps for this. I had hand-drawn maps on large scale as well that wouldn't reduce down for scanning purposes, and probably wouldn't have looked good on the render anyway. So hopefully the lack of battle maps in this episode didn't disturb you guys as viewers. I think hopefully the written description conveys what's going on in those encounters. In any case, this adventure into Leng was really fun, and definitely was more of me because I wrote a lot of that material as opposed to pulling it from the books. So that's fun to share with you guys as well. Sometimes you go way off the beaten path, and that was what happened here. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this. There's another episode coming at you real soon.